Hi, teachers. I'm Walter from EOT in Brazil. Today, we're starting a new course. Now, in this one, we're going to be talking about assessment. And then let me ask you this question. How much do you know about assessment? And I'm talking about, there is just a huge variety of things involved in assessment. And how much do you enjoy talking about that? How much do you know about those things and details? And come with us in this new course, and hopefully you're going to learn a little bit more, right? See you in a second. Roda a vinheta.
See you. All right, welcome back, everyone. So I think that before we can, I think the best way to get a course started on actually anything, not only assessment, but I think that the first step is defining the object of study, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
Walter, in your opinion, perspective, experience, and study, what is assessment?
But I'm gonna come up with an analogy here. So if you allow me a second,
Okay.
I'm gonna share my screen for a second. Um, let's imagine something like an umbrella, a big one, right? So this huge, enormous one, I'm gonna call evaluation. Underneath this one, there's a smaller one, right? And this one, I'm gonna call assessment. And then right beneath, I'm gonna have another one, a smaller one, and I'm gonna call it testing.
Mm-hmm.
So just to make it like clear, um, the way I see and the way I understand this stuff is that is that uh, testing is, and when we talk about assessment, I think a lot of people have this misconception that we are necessarily talking about testing, and that it is always that kind of formal test that students are going to sit and do something under exam conditions, and okay, that is testing, but it is a part of assessment, which is a part of evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if we're gonna focus in here, there is just so much that we can discuss, and of course, testing is a part of it, but it's not all of it. There are many types of assessment. There are many reasons why we assess students, but basically, you are coming up with information about the learning process and how students are performing. That could be for one type of assessment, or because you want, maybe you want to feed this information back into the program, the course that they're taking, the syllabus that they're following, and make changes to that syllabus, or because you need to know whether this student is ready to move on to the next level, and in that way you need information to know if they learned with the program, if they're ready for a certain level. And then
Mm-hmm.
you see that we're gonna end up talking about like a vast majority, a vast variety of things. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're gonna talk about the CFR A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, and then you have all those criterias, then a student is ready to move up the level, and then you're gonna assess them according to certain criteria. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe you just need to know if they are following the course, then you're gonna test them and maybe change that program.
Mm-hmm.
But what about you? What do you have in mind when we talk about
I,
assessment?
I agree. I like this idea of coming up, perhaps uh, gathering information from a variety of instruments that we can use to assess. But I think a very close synonym to assessing to assessment is measurement. So
Yes.
whenever you're
Mhm.
assessing, you're measuring
Mhm.
something, right? So you're measuring learning, you're measuring um well, basically learning and perhaps teaching
Skills
as
and
well,
systems, right?
depending, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very solid definition. It's creating tools that will allow you to measure what you want to measure, right? Be it student development in any of the areas, or teacher development if you're a teacher educator and you want to assess how effective your training sessions are to
Mhm.
this cohort of teachers. But basically creating
Mm.
instruments and using these instruments to measure development or the lack
Absolutely.
thereof.
Uh,
Okay.
so the first question was the what. What is assessment,
Uh-huh.
basically, right? So I think it's just it needs to be very clear that we're talking about something that is enormous.
Mhm.
It's just really extensive. There's a lot of things that can be considered assessment. Uh, I'm going to give them one example. Yes, if you have an end of year test and you need to know if the students, absorbed what they had to absorb and now they're ready to pass and move on levels, yes, that's part of assessment. But guess what? If you have a program in which there is no testing,
Mhm.
does that mean that
Mhm.
there is no assessment?
Oh, no, quite the opposite. Right.
Quite the
Yeah, there's a
opposite.
lot of assessment going on. Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel that sometimes people um confuse assessment, maybe not confuse, but they only see the formal aspect of assessment, right?
Mhm.
So it's a written test, it's an oral test. But there are other instruments. But I think we're skipping. We're segueing into the how we assess,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yes, you can assess with a written test, with an oral test, with a project, with a presentation, a portfolio, right? So there are,
Mhm.
as we were saying, lots of instruments that you can use to assess, right? And one of these can be a test, as you were saying, right? So I think the metaphor for the umbrella is exactly that, right? Showing that
Gives us
uh,
a
uh,
perspective. But okay,
hypernyms and
the what?
mhm,
Uh, we could say that it is a way to collect.
and evaluate and collect and interpret um, evidence of development, perhaps.
What do you think? Evidence of learning.
Yeah,
Uh,
collect and interpret evidence of learning. Yeah, I
oh,
think
to measure students'
development. Yeah, okay.
development.
Yeah, I think it's a solid definition.
We could keep it like that, and then we move on. Now I ask you the next question. Why do we assess?
Okay. We assess because that's our job, basically. But um, we assess to know, um, well, to know where students are, and to notice the, perhaps not notice, but to measure the difference between point A and point B in their studies, and we can use this information, and we should use this information to guide future teaching, right? So assessment informs future teaching.
I'm gonna prolong that a little. I think the why is actually one of the broadest things here, because there is such a variety of reasons for us to do this thing, to assess students. I'm gonna give you one example. So why do you assess them? A first reason would be because you need to diagnose, or you need to place, right? You need to diagnose their needs. You need to place the students into a level. Also, you need to, as you were saying, the ones you're saying would be, it would be part of formative assessment, which is to feed the learning process. Help me word that in a better way.
I think the two that you wrote, they are informing future teaching.
Okay,
I like where you're going. So we got diagnostic assessment, placing. We have achievement assessment as well, right?
Yes.
Like end of term projects or tests to take a snapshot of where students have arrived at the end of a course.
Nice.
Right.
Nice. Okay, so we are informing learning in that case, right? We inform where things are going, where things need to go as well, right? Great.
Yeah, because
sounds great.
Even if we're talking about achievement assessing, I feel that there is only one case in which this assessment is not informing future learning. It's the case when students take a proficiency exam, any level, that doesn't really matter. But then the student decides not to continue learning English. So, okay, so I needed the
They
first
decide that they're done.
That they're done, and then you're
Yes.
not informing future teaching. But I think this is an exception because we keep on learning, even though we're not in a course. But I feel that every kind of assessment is to inform future learning and teaching. I might be wrong though.
Right? As it should be. And then I guess we can move on to the last one, right?
How?
Which
is
the how. And then again, you see that we go to, as we look at this, because when you study this kind of thing, then you automatically just start thinking of things here, right? So when you think of how, you're already thinking of test types in here. And then, for example, you could be thinking of those multiple choice, that kind of thing. There's a name for that kind of test, which we call discrete item or discrete point. I think Brown calls it discrete point, but Harris and McCann they call it discrete item. Not much of a difference, really. Same thing here. Discrete item point, discrete item, discrete point would be the test in which there is only one correct answer. And therefore, you see that the criteria is kind of obvious because and then we're already talking about marking in there. But anyway, in here we are talking about objective marking as well, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So this is one of the house. Bruno will give you another.
Oh, well, there's subjective marking.
Yes. Can you give me an example of a test as opposed to discrete item discrete item test?
Uh, for example, an oral test.
An oral test,
You're going to have subjective marking.
oral direct, right?
Mhm.
Test, which would be subjective.
Yeah.
Use subjective marking.
And it really depends, right? Because if you imagine, for example, a math teacher testing students orally on the we say tabuada, right? On multiplication tables, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It is
No idea
oral, so
what they call.
three times 3, 9. It is an oral test, but it's objective
Yes,
marking,
it
right?
is objective marking. So it is not necessarily going to be subjective
Mhm,
marked, just subjectively marked just because it's oral.
mhm.
Makes sense?
Yeah,
Makes
because
sense.
if it's English, for example, what's your name? My name is Pa. How old are
Mm-hmm.
you? I'm 20 years old, right? So it's quite objective if that's your test, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
I
it's
agree.
either
I agree.
right or wrong, right?
What if you want to use an oral or a writing test to assess students' ability to use grammar? You are writing, you are testing, you are assessing their writing or oral skills, but you're also assessing their use of lexis or grammar.
Mhm,
And then it's not a direct test anymore. Then it becomes an integral test, integrative test.
mhm. Okay, like a composition, for example.
Yes.
Students write a paragraph about, okay.
And then,
And then
yes.
it's
And but then
you're
again,
integrating stuff. Okay.
yes.
As
Yes.
opposed
Just
to
like
direct testing.
as opposed to direct testing
Okay.
or indirect testing, right? Because a discrete point test is an indirect.
Can you expand on that?
Okay, sure. Let's
I think the question is, what is indirect testing?
A direct test is gonna test the skill that it wants to test
Okay.
directly. So
Mhm,
I want to know if your speaking is um, up to the standards of a B2, and then
mhm,
for example I do an oral or written examination, like you have to write a composition, so that's a direct test of that. On
mhm.
the other hand, indirect testing would be like, I can't, how would you know if somebody can speak or write appropriately using a multiple choice?
Oh, okay.
Right,
Mhm.
like so I'm just gonna put a multiple choice as an example here, but you see that, like, it's what happens in Brazilian regular schools. They're like,
Language
most of
schools as
them,
well.
yes, they
Yeah.
don't have like an oral or a writing test. And then how would you know that this person is actually moving up the levels if you're only
Uh-huh.
doing multiple choice or
Uh,
open closes or sentence transformations, keyword transformations? Even though, and I think there's a lot of that in the book by, man, I don't want to mispronounce his name. Mac, Mac, McNamara. It's
McNamara. Yeah.
McNamara.
I don't know
Yeah,
how you pronounce the name. I've only written
yeah.
their work.
I don't I'm like, please take this with pinches of salt, as Bruno usually says. But I think this guy wrote a lot about the beginning of the multiple choice testing in the beginning of I think it's from the 60s, when they came up with the idea of multiple choice, because it would replace writing testing.
Isn't it great?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then again, I am not sure if it was the multiple choice or the sentence transformation or the multiple choice closer or even open close. It might be any of those. And
The thing, the thing with indirect testing is so just to illustrate, we just spent the last trimester teaching students how to tell stories. So we're using narrative tenses, we're using vocabulary related to that, we're using sub skills in speaking to make the story interesting, whatever. And then indirect testing would be giving students a quiz to fill in the gaps using narrative tenses. That's indirect
it is.
testing.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yes, that would be
So
indirect.
if you have been teaching for more than a semester, you know of a student who aces filling the gap quizzes and multiple choices, but cannot speak and use the language that he
for
filled
their lives.
in the quiz.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
like that.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
which is actually a common thing in Asian learning. Asian
Oh, is it?
learners, as they have a tendency, they're like brilliant. They test really well. They test
Mhm,
highly, but they have more difficulties with like they
mhm,
write better than they speak as well.
mhm.
I don't know how that changed, but I think it's something that is quite expected, I would say. But well, we'll
Mm.
have friends in Japan. We gotta ask them about
Right, we can
it.
ask them. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
but yeah, I remember something while I was in Canada, something about that. Somebody said something about that. Yeah.
mhm. Well, I think to wrap up, I feel that whenever we're assessing, I think that another synonym for assessing, and bear with me in this one, I'll explain. I feel that assessing is always a comparison. You're always
Mm,
comparing the student's performance with perhaps the ideal performance for that level, for that situation, right? So be it an indirect test, for example, you're comparing students' answers to
mm,
the key. If it's an oral test like Cambridge exams,
mm.
you're comparing students' abilities and proficiency with those of an ideal, say, C2 candidate, right? So I feel that we were able to well,
Mm.
assess and interpret this data based on this comparison of what is and what we thought it could be, right?
Absolutely.
So
I agree, and we do have a name for that. Um, Now you bear with me. Norm reference tests and
yes, norm in rubrics. It's
yeah,
not rubrics reference, but it's the one that uses rubrics, right?
absolutely. But give me 1 second. I will find
Okay.
it in a second. Yeah. So we have criterion reference
Mm-hmm,
testing and we have norm reference testing.
mm-hmm,
And a norm reference test is the one in which it's the kind of test that you get for university. So students are compared to one another. So for example, let's say I write a test with 10 options, that there are 10 questions,
mm-hmm,
and let's say 100, and then all of them are multiple choice, and then students, like most students get 25 of 25, which is not much out of 100 correct answers, 25 correct answers, which means that our yardstick's gonna go down, right? So everybody who gets 21 would pass and get into university in that year, as opposed to the next year when some students got 75. So you see that the bar is going to go up, and students who scored 23 in the same test wouldn't have a chance, because we're comparing students. So the yardstick is the performance of the students, which is to be compared to a criterion reference test, which is the one just like the Cambridge exams, in the suit thing. Damn it, I forgot.
Main suit, Cambridge main
the main suit test, in which it doesn't work like that. You have like, say, students are expected to do this, this, and this, or students to reach this level need to get this amount of correct answers in this part of the test. And then if all of them get 5 out of 20, 25 out of 100, they might all fail.
They will all fail.
They will all fail. It doesn't matter if there is one doing great and the other is not so much, or if one of them gets 100 and the other gets a 5. If it's below what they expect, the student will fail, and that's a criterion reference test. I wasn't expecting to talk about that one.
Now.
Yeah.
But I think we covered our what, why, and how of assessment. So stay tuned, because next week we're going to be talking about formative and summative assessment. And we'll see you. Oh, and like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends. Manda no grupo da família. Send it to everybody.
Yes.
Right? Send it to your grandmother. Perhaps she'll become an English teacher in the near future.
My mom doesn't know English. She doesn't speak English or understand it anyway. But she always, I was like, yeah, well, what were you talking about in this video? Because she sees it, she subscribed to the channel.
Subscribes, like, likes, comments.
And she's a naturally curious person, so she's always like, you were laughing a lot in this one. What was the discussion?
Yeah, we're happy people.
Yes.
All right, so see you in the next video.
See you in the next one. Thank you.